Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Lucas Bennett has always been a living legend. At least, for those who really knew he existed. In the underworld of finance, among mobsters, corrupt politicians, cartels, and big-time fraudsters, his name was whispered in secret conversations, accompanied by a chill down the spine. And yet, no one knew who he was, what he looked like, where he lived, or even if he really existed. He was almost a myth. A ghost that appeared when someone least expected it, and when he did, it was already too late. In the shadows of the financial system, he was known as the Shadow Code. A codename that, for the upper echelons of the American government and some international agencies, carried more weight than any military operation. Because while armed forces fought with weapons, the Shadow Code fought with information. He brought down empires, destroyed illicit fortunes, dismantled money laundering schemes, and made billions evaporate overnight, all without firing a single shot. His power wasn't in his hands. It was in his mind. While the most powerful criminals in the world hid money in international networks, using sophisticated systems, shell companies, and secret accounts scattered across the globe, he tracked, deciphered, understood, and dismantled. All it took was one number out of place, one suspicious transfer, one forgotten digital signature on a contract, and the domino effect began. The most impressive thing was that he never needed to expose himself. He never appeared. Never left traces. Even within the government itself, only a small elite knew of his true existence. Most agents, investigators, and analysts thought the Shadow Code was just a protocol, a system, maybe a secret technology. No one imagined that behind that codename was a flesh-and-blood man. And this man hid behind the simplest and most discreet life anyone could imagine. To the eyes of anyone, Lucas Bennett was just another financial consultant living an ordinary life. A regular citizen, without luxury, without extravagance, without anything that would draw curiosity. A common face in the crowd. The kind of person you see every day and, the next minute, already forget. And that was exactly what he wanted. Living in the shadows required sacrifices. As much as he was in love with Madeline, the woman he had shared his life with for over 10 years, he never formalized their union. Not because he didn't love her. But because any paper, any signature, any document, was a breach in the perfect system he had built for himself. Everything in his life was meticulously planned so he would never be found. To the neighbors, Lucas and Madeline were a reserved, polite couple who led a quiet life. They traveled occasionally, worked a lot, took care of their home, and seemed happy. But no one ever imagined that when Lucas said he was on a business trip, he was actually sitting in a hotel room in Singapore, London, Zurich, or Dubai, tracking billions hidden in tax havens, taking down criminal networks that had operated for decades, exposing politicians, businessmen, and criminals who thought they were untouchable. The mere fact that the Shadow Code took an interest in an operation was enough to make many powerful people lose sleep. No one knew where he came from. No one knew how he obtained the information. And, above all, no one knew how to stop him. What Lucas never imagined, is that while he was dismantling the biggest financial schemes on the planet, while protecting himself against the most dangerous men in the world, the most destructive betrayal wouldn't come from the underworld. It was much closer. Inside his own home. As skilled as Lucas was at deciphering patterns, at noticing suspicious behaviors, he never imagined that one day his own intuition would need to be activated inside his own house. For over a decade, he believed that this was the only space where he could simply be Lucas. An ordinary man. A husband. A partner. And, ironically, the man who knew so much about secrets kept the biggest one from the person he loved most. Madeline never knew. She never even suspected that this reserved, gentle, and caring financial consultant was, in fact, the feared Shadow Code. He was always meticulous. He calculated every word, every absence, every excuse. His business trips, in the version he told her, were consulting gigs for foreign investors, strategic meetings, conferences. And she believed, as any wife would. After all, during all those years, there was never a real reason to doubt. Lucas was always present. Always affectionate, helpful, attentive. He made sure to create memories, to be part of her life, to build a solid relationship, even while carrying a universe she would never know existed. But something started to bother him. Small changes that only someone with his level of perception would notice. Madeline, who had always been a woman of linear habits, began showing subtle shifts in behavior. A distraction in the middle of a conversation, laughter out of context, vacant stares lost between words, automatic responses, hugs that felt more like protocols than spontaneous gestures. And if there's one thing Lucas had learned throughout his life, it's that behavior never lies. Words can be rehearsed, speeches can be perfect, but the body always gives it away. She became more intense in intimacy, as if trying to compensate for some hidden guilt. More affectionate than usual, more available, but at the same time, there was a clear emotional distance. As if she was physically present but mentally somewhere else. And that somewhere else wasn't an abstract place. It was someone. An invisible presence, which, until then, Lucas couldn't name, but he could already feel. It all started making even more sense when he noticed changes in her cell phone usage pattern. Before, she would leave the device lying around the house, thrown on the table, the bookshelf, the couch. Now, it was always nearby. Always on silent mode. Notifications disappeared from the screen. And even though she tried to hide it, there was a slight discomfort every time he approached while she was typing. Lucas, who spent his entire life deciphering crimes, tracking hidden fortunes, dismantling criminal networks, immediately understood that he was facing a pattern. Only this time, the pattern wasn't in an offshore account, nor in a suspicious transaction. It was right there, inside his own home, in the gaze of the woman he loved. He tried, in every way possible, to believe that this was a product of his own paranoia, perhaps a reflection of his own work. But someone who lives immersed in lies knows exactly how a lie behaves. And when it starts to seep into a relationship, the feeling is suffocating. Even so, there was a constant internal battle. Part of him wanted to simply ignore it. Pretend it was just a phase. That maybe she was going through some personal crisis, some insecurity, some confusion. But the other part, the part that had never failed, that had never missed an investigation, that had never made a wrong analysis, screamed. And the more he tried to silence that voice, the more it made itself heard. That's when he decided to test a protocol he had never needed to use inside his own home. A fake trip. A fictitious contract, in another city. He said goodbye to Madeline with a kiss, a tight hug, promises that he'd be back in 2 days, and then settled into a hotel not far from his house, turned on his laptop, and accessed one of the most powerful tools he possessed. The first thing he did was activate the tracking on her cell phone. Something that, for him, took less than 5 minutes. Then, he accessed the call logs from the past few months. And that's where he found the first concrete sign. A recurring number, appearing at random times, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes during business hours. A number that wasn't saved in her contacts. And, for someone like Lucas, an unsaved number was a direct invitation for investigation. He ran a cross-analysis, pulled records, identified the line's owner. Carter Evans. The name immediately lit up like a red light in his mind. He quickly started a full sweep. Public data, old records, cross-referencing information in restricted databases, military history, social media, previous addresses, recent movements. And, piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape. Carter Evans was a former Marine. A name that, until that moment, had never been part of Lucas's life. But, between the lines of the data appearing on the screen, he discovered that this man did, in fact, have a past with Madeline. A past she had never mentioned. Old photos, travel records, forgotten comments on social media, it was all there. A story that seemed to have been buried, filed away in the depths of memory, but that, clearly, had now resurfaced. His stomach tightened. For the first time in many years, Lucas felt something he couldn't describe. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was a cruel mix of disappointment, disbelief, and pain. Pain that didn't come from an external threat, nor from a cartel, nor from a criminal organization. It came from within. From where, theoretically, he would never be hit. And if there was one thing Lucas Bennett had learned in life, it's that nothing, absolutely nothing, happens by chance. If Carter Evans had returned, and if Madeline was in contact with him, this wasn't a coincidence. It was a move. A plan. Something was happening. And he, more than anyone, needed to find out what it was. What Lucas still didn't know, is that the truth would be much more devastating than anything he had ever seen in his life. At the hotel, with the laptop open, Lucas did what he knew better than anyone else in the world. He investigated Carter with surgical precision, pulling every piece of data, every movement, every possible record. But the more he dug, the more he realized that Carter, in the end, was just an ordinary man. A former Marine, simple life, clean record, no suspicious financial activity, no connection to anything illegal, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. And what hurt the most, was realizing that, no matter how much he tracked money, data, and secrets, there was no tool in the world capable of tracking feelings. This was impossible even for him. While running another scan, something popped up on the screen. Carter received a message. He read it immediately. And Lucas did too. On the screen, the sentence cut like a knife. My husband is traveling again, we can meet today at 7, at the Bella Luna restaurant. His hands froze for a few seconds. Then, without hesitation, he noted the time, the location, and plotted his next move. He arrived early, well before them. Positioned himself in a spot where he could see everything without being seen. Turned on his equipment, set up the camera, adjusted the audio. And then, he just observed. Minutes passed until he saw her car park. Madeline got out smiling, fixing her hair, looking at her reflection in the glass as if getting ready for someone special. Carter was already waiting at the door. They greeted each other with a hug that lasted longer than any innocent embrace. They laughed. They talked, looking into each other's eyes, holding hands, without any sign of guilt, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. They went in. Sat down. Ordered wine. Toasted. Smiles, touches on the hands, long glances. She played with her hair, he pulled out her chair, and the two behaved exactly like a couple reuniting after years, living a moment they seemed to have desired for a long time. They spoke intimately, as if nothing and no one outside that table existed. Lucas's blood boiled, but his face remained expressionless. He analyzed every second, recorded every detail. Until he realized he had seen enough. He packed up the equipment, closed the laptop, stood up, and walked straight to their table. When he stopped in front of them, Madeline froze. Carter also froze instantly. Her smile disappeared the moment her eyes met his. She went pale, paralyzed. He couldn't even disguise the shock. Lucas, cold, without changing his tone, stared at both of them and let out just one phrase, hard as concrete. I hope you're enjoying this, because it's the last time. Lucas left the restaurant with firm steps, without looking back, without caring what he left behind at that table. He walked to the car, started the engine, and drove straight home. As soon as he entered, he crossed the threshold like someone executing a plan that had already been drawn in his head for a long time. He grabbed some equipment, shut down systems, made backups, erased traces, executed protocols he himself had created over the years. Every movement was calculated. Every second, meticulously planned. Madeline, at that moment, was still sitting in the restaurant, frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. When she realized, she picked up her phone and tried to call him. The call didn't even go through. It went straight to a dead tone, as if the number didn't exist anymore. She tried again. And again. Always the same thing. Meanwhile, Lucas executed the final operation. He closed accounts, transferred funds, deleted histories, terminated contracts, wiped out any trace of his existence. Everything he owned, investments, reserves, funds, applications, was simply disintegrated from the point of view of anyone who might try to track it. It vanished. He took everything. Every cent. And it was easier than any operation he had ever performed in his life. Because, in that relationship, there had never been a signed paper, no formal contract, no tie that could be used against him. The house they lived in? It was rented. The lease was in his name. The car? In his name. The bank accounts? Managed exclusively by him. She had never worried about it. And now, she would understand firsthand what it meant to depend completely on someone who, in reality, had never been fully there. That night, while she desperately tried to reach him, Lucas was already gone. Off the map, out of the city, out of the country. He disappeared just as he always knew how, just as he had trained his whole life to do. The shadow code simply turned into a shadow. Days passed, and the reality began to sink in. The credit card blocked. The account balances zeroed out. All access she had to resources was simply cut off. Passwords, apps, everything, deactivated. She tried accessing online banking. Invalid account. She searched for statements, records, anything that might point to some financial resource. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. On the fourth day, she received a call that shattered the little balance she still had left. It was from the property management company. The voice, cold and direct, informed her that the lease had expired and would not be renewed. They told her she had 5 days to vacate the property. She tried to argue, asked for an extension, said her husband handled these matters, that there must be some mistake. The response was short and final. There was no more contract, no more agreement, no more house. Desperate, she picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and called Carter. When he answered, she broke down. She told him everything. Said Lucas had disappeared, taken everything, that she had no more money, that she was about to be evicted. And on the other end, the response came dry, without beating around the bush, without embellishments. Madeline. I live in a small apartment. You wouldn't even fit here. Those words cut like a blade. Suddenly, she remembered exactly who Carter had always been. A man who never wanted commitment, never tied himself down, never promised a future to anyone. Someone who, by nature, was free, detached, averse to any responsibility that wasn't about himself. And now, when she needed him most, there was the clear reminder of who he truly always was. With no alternatives left, she packed what she could, stuffed everything into a few suitcases, and returned to her mother's house. A return loaded with shame, frustration, pain, and a reality she never imagined she would live. As for Lucas, no one knows. No one ever heard from him again. The man who, for years, dismantled schemes, tracked billions, destroyed illicit fortunes, and lived like a shadow, simply did what he knew best. He disappeared. Maybe he's in some distant country, sitting in a cafe, discreetly observing another criminal network he's about to take down. Or maybe he's somewhere no one will ever find him, living exactly as he always lived, invisible. Because when a ghost decides to disappear, not even love can find him.
Suspicious of your wife or daughter-in-law? Don't go through what we saw in the video. Check the link in the comments and get the ebook with valuable tips and investigator-approved sites to clear your doubts.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.